Answer number 3, they went into the rabbit hole.
Superheroes use superposition, with the world being potential strips of reality. Until we choose. Heroes choose what they want. Being in many places at once, experiencing many possibilities all at once, and then collapsing on the one. The question is, how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go?
I think we love rabbit holes so much because we realize that there is a greater reality out there and that the reality is much more akin to our dreams.
Your own mind is creating multiple possibilities in your subconscious. The superpositions of possibilities are in your subconscious. I mean, you may be consciously aware of them, but they exist, I think, in superposition of multiple possibilities, which after a while will collapse to one or the other.
Project or slam into the future or cast a thought ahead of itself.
Nice shot.
"50 years ago, we were trying to understand the electron. And for God's sakes, the thing turns out to be a wave function, okay? It's a wave. You can't localize it. You try to localize it. It really slips through your fingers. It's impossible to localize. So for a while, we got used to the fact that, okay, there are no particles ultimately. There are just waves. It's called a wave function. When you go deeper into physics and you really try to get a handle on what the wave function is, you localize that wave, and the wave slips through your fingers because the wave actually gets replaced in quantum field theory with something more abstract that doesn't even have a shape. It must be described instead as a simultaneous coexistence of all possible shapes. It's not even a self-respecting wave. It's something more abstract than that. It has slipped through your fingers again. And then when you get beyond quantum field theory to unified field theory, you try to even grasp the nature of that quantum field, which is already abstract, and you end up with something that's pure being, absolutely beyond the intellect to even describe. Pure abstractness, pure potentiality, pure existence.
But the great-great-granddaddy of wacky quantum weirdness is entanglement. If time reversal symmetry destroys the notion of time, then entanglement crushes our experience of space. Two objects, two electrons created together, are entangled. Send one to the other side of the universe. Now, do something to one, and the other responds instantly. Instantly. So, either information is traveling infinitely fast, or, in reality, they are still connected. They are entangled. And since everything was entangled at the moment of the Big Bang, that means everything is still touching. Space is just the construct that gives the illusion that there are separate objects. Are we far enough down the rabbit hole yet?
To go down the rabbit hole and to get away from the mundane is thrilling. Everybody secretly is an adventurer. When we head down a rabbit hole, we have to reformat all of our knowledge and our present understanding, and we have to be able to combine knowledge in a different way than we've processed it up until this point. It means that we have to step outside the box of our most familiar, most common way of thinking. We have to begin to perceive the question or the understanding from a different point of view. And in order to do that, you have to mix circuits in the brain.
It's tricky. I don't know if you want to go there. You do want to go there? So, entanglement is space separated and time separated. One way of looking very specifically at the time separation aspect, it's much easier to do this with one individual rather than two. Because who are you better entangled with than anyone? It's yourself. It's your future self that you're entangled with. and your past self. So the experiment that I developed to look at this is we wire you up typically to look at skin conductance, but also heart rate and other parameters. You will sit in front of a computer screen and you press a button, and you know that 5 seconds later you're going to see a picture. It could be a very calm picture, or it might be a very emotional picture. And it's randomly selected by the computer immediately before it's shown. So when you press the button, the future is not yet determined. So you need real precognition in order to be able to jump into the future and get it somehow. So since we're looking at your physiology, we know what happens to physiology after you see an emotional image. And we know what happens after you see a calm image. The question is, does that future experience leak into your present? Does it happen before you see the picture? And through this experiment, you can see what happens. Electrical activity of the heart, EKG. This is photoplethysmograph, which is the amount of blood in the fingertip. And respiration, breathing in, breathing out. Press the button, well, what happens to physiology? Well, if it starts rising before the image appears, it may suggest that you're about to get an emotional picture. And if it stays calm, it suggests maybe you're going to get a calm picture. So we've done this kind of experiment for several hundred people, and colleagues have run this experiment as well. And as it turns out, that is exactly what you see. People become aroused before randomly selected pictures in the future that happen to be emotional, and they remain calm before randomly selected pictures that are calm. This has been seen in heart rate changes, in skin conductance, in the brain, and basically systemically throughout the body. We are entangled with our future selves.
Wormholes are topological fluctuations, really channels of communication that connect distant parts of the universe instantaneously. Even time travel is possible.
The way I understand a rabbit hole is that it is a portal to another reality. Now, that could be the most banal thing in the world. You know, if I just open a door and go through it, portal means very little in that sense. But in the sense we're talking about it here, we're talking about how we access another dimension of reality.
You now can see in numerous labs around the United States objects that are large enough to be seen by the naked eye, and they are in 2 places simultaneously. And you can actually take a photograph of that. Now, I suppose if you showed a photograph, they'd say, oh, great, here's this nice blob of colored light, and I see there's a bit of it over here and another bit of it. So you got a picture of 2 dots. What's the big deal?
Superposition is pre-detection. What I was speaking about in the film is post-detection. Now, under normal circumstances, a single object, once it has been detected, is in just one position. However, there are states of matter that have been created now in which objects can be in multiple positions simultaneously, not just 2, but actually as many as 3,000 positions. The first of these objects were called Bose-Einstein condensates. And they are single wave functions, meaning they are single particles. But even though they're a single wave function, the wave function has multiple positions.
And if you say, well, look right in the chamber. You know, you can see it right there. Oh, I see 2 things there. You say, no, that's not 2 things. That's one thing. It's the same thing in 2 places.
Tricky point here is that it's still a single wave function. It's not 3,000 separate wave functions. It's one wave function. So it's one particle.
I'm not sure that people's jaw would drop about it, because I don't think people really believe it. And I don't mean that people say, oh, you're lying, or oh, the scientists are confused. I think it is so mysterious that you can't even understand how amazing it is.
One particle in 3,000 different locations.
Now, if you were to weigh one of them, would it weigh 1/3000th?
Well, you can't weigh one of them.
Why?
Because it's one particle. It's one indivisible particle.
But if it's But if it's in different locations, can't you put a scale under 1?
No, it's inseparable. It's not a set. This is the tricky conceptual part, that it's not 3,000 separate parts.
Even though it looks that way.
Right. You can look at it, and I mean, you can't actually see the one with 3,000, but you can look at the simpler ones, the ones that are 2 or 3 or 4, and you can see, as I say, if you go onto the web, you'll see photographs of these. You'll see these little dots floating in space, and these are the different parts of one object. They're not separable. It's not 4 different objects or 6 different objects. It's one wave function. It's one object.
That's a real brain fart, isn't it? Because when you think about it, you just, wait a minute, no. They're like here, here, here. So it's obviously 1, 2, 3.
No, you can't, and you can't pull one away from the others. If you try to pull one away from the others, the entire thing will just disappear. And then furthermore, you've seen Star Trek and whatnot. Beam me up, Scotty.
Beam me up, Scotty.
Get lost forever down the rabbit hole.
How far down the rabbit hole do
Be
you...
in the mystery.
So it all seems sort of, oh, well, what does that really mean? But you've got to really stop and think about what that means, that it's the same object and it's in 2 places at once. And people tinker in the lab and they get angry about things and they have lunch and they go home and they lead their lives just as though nothing utterly astounding is happening, because, of course, that's how you have to go about it. And yet there is this completely amazing magic sitting right in front of your eyes.
Where the hell are you? I've got a studio full of people, but oh my God, there's no photographer. Where can she be? Aliens? Loch Ness Monster? A hot date?
We took 2 simple black boxes like this. Inside is a very simple electric circuit with a few diodes, oscillator, EEPROM, some resistors and capacitors. Basically, that's it. We wrap one in aluminum foil. We put it in an electrically grounded Faraday cage. The other we set on a tabletop around which 4 very well qualified meditators, highly inner self-managed individuals sit. And they go into a deep meditative state. They cleanse the environment. They make it essentially a sacred space using their mind cleansing procedures and their intentions. And then one of the 4 speaks the specific intention for this device. The intention is to influence a particular target experiment. Might be to increase the pH of purified water by 1 full pH unit, or to decrease the pH by 1 full pH unit. We've used these devices on all those experiments and have been robustly successful. In the meditative process, then after one speaks the particular intention, it's held various ways by the 4 for maybe 15 minutes, and then so be it, it's let go. And then a subsidiary intention is stated to seal that imprint into the device. We take one of these devices with its aluminum foil, we put it in a soft package, we put it in a FedEx packet, we ship it 2,000 miles away to the laboratory we were using up in Minnesota. And as soon as it arrives there, it goes into its own electrically grounded Faraday cage. The next day we do the same with the control. The experiment is running, and basically then one just takes the device out, sets it beside the experiment within 6 inches to a foot, and turns it on for a period of time. That's it. Now, we learned over some period of time that there was another factor. We found that the use of these, we call them intention imprinted electrical devices, the continued use of this somehow conditions the space to some higher level of symmetry. And we start getting new phenomena. That is, the devices work. That is, the pH, which is normal, starts rising 1 full pH unit, if that was the imprint, or starts dropping. In the living system, you go plus or minus a half a pH unit in either direction, you're dead on both ends. So these are very big effects. So, for example, in terms of healing, one of the things that we ultimately expect to do is to be able to broadcast this so that we create an environment where people are 500 or 1,000 miles away or 10,000 miles away, wherein they can use their intention to enhance their health.
The question is, when you're studying the mind-matter interface, how do you go about studying it? From a naive point of view, you would think that maybe we should just get like a feather and see if we can make it float, or get an object and push it, something like that. The thing is, though, that happens so rarely. Even spontaneously, it happens extremely rarely. It basically never happens in the laboratory. So I think the reason that the mind-matter interface does not work very well on a large physical object is because that object has an enormous amount of inertia to stay where it is. You might be thinking thoughts at it saying, push, move, and it's thinking thoughts back at you saying, no, I don't want to. Or it would take an enormous amount of physical force in order to make it move. So back in the 1600s, when Francis Bacon was developing empiricism in science, he actually wrote in one of his books about ways of studying the mind-matter interaction and mentioned dice as a possibility. Because every time a die bounces, you can trace all the way down to quantum events which cause it to turn this way versus that way. So if it bounces a bunch of times, it basically becomes a quantum mechanical uncertainty, even in something as large as the die. So back in the 1930s, researchers started using dice as a form to see if mind can somehow get into the quantum uncertainty and bias what is happening in the die as it was rolling. Around the 1960s, when electronics came around, someone had the idea of simulating a die in electronic circuits. And the reason that became useful was because it became very easy to measure precisely what was happening in every single bounce or equivalent of a bounce. And you could record it automatically. You can create new kinds of experiments where you didn't have to worry anymore about whether the recording was correct or whether the die became unbalanced. So random number generators, modern versions of it, were created as a refinement of techniques that had been used in the laboratory for many, many years.
And could you go over some of your findings on that?
One type of random number generator experiment that's been conducted many, many times, hundreds of times, over the past 4 decades or so, since around the 1960s, has been a random generator that only produces sequences of random bits, zeros and ones, like flipping coins. And you would simply ask somebody to press a button, it would produce 200 bits. And you would ask them to say, well, try to make it produce more 1 bits than 0 bits. And when you take the entire body of literature, all of the hundreds of experiments that have been done, you can ask a single question. Did it matter that people were trying to push it towards ones or push it towards zeros? And the overall answer is yes, it does matter. That somehow intention is correlated with the operation, with the output of these random number generators, such that if you wish for more ones, somehow the generators produce more ones. The last analysis that I did, which looked at all of these experiments, the final analysis is 50,000 to 1. The odds against chance are 50,000 to 1 that the behavior of the random number generators would go in the direction that they did, that were consistent with what intention was wishing them to do.
So when they talk about in quantum physics being a completely arbitrary and random process, what they're not accounting for is the extraordinary effect of human thought, of human intention.
When the O.J. Simpson trial was going on, lots of people are watching television because of the courtroom drama that was unfolding. And Radin intuited that there must be a lot of intention going on.
I'll preface it with why we thought of doing that in the first place. So for 30 years, people in the laboratory have been taking the random number generator and the human and asking the human to try to interact with the generator, and we see small effects. And then after a while, after repeating it over and over again, basically it gets boring. Well, what else does it mean? One of the implications of what it means is that we're not dealing, when we deal with stuff in the laboratory, it's an artificial and constrained environment. It's extremely difficult to produce real intention and real motivation in the laboratory. But that's where these big things happen. So we're looking for ways of getting out of the laboratory but still maintaining control over what we're measuring. So you take a random number generator into an environment like a group that's meditating. Long-term meditators, they know what they're doing, they become extremely coherent as a group. And I'm thinking, well, that would be a good place to take a random number generator, because maybe their intention is infiltrating out into the environment and creating a form of order, mind order, that would be reflected in matter. Well, so we'll take our form of matter, which is a random number generator. We know how to look for order in these things, because the only thing that can happen in a random number generator that's unusual is to become less random. So we use statistical ways of detecting that. And sure enough, my colleagues, Roger Nelson, Dick Bierman, many others around the world have taken random number generators within groups that are doing coherent things, and sure enough, the random number generators become coherent. So the matter becomes ordered. And then they started thinking, well, what would happen if we're not dealing with groups of a couple dozen, but with hundreds of millions of people, all of whom had their attention focused suddenly on something? And as it turned out, that about a month from the time I had that thought was going to be the reading of the O.J. Simpson verdict. So this was an unusual point in human history, I think, in that people knew far in advance that within a fraction of a second, either saying the words guilty or not guilty, something of very high interest would occur, which would attract hundreds of millions of people live. So I figured, okay, we have to do this as an experiment then. I had 3 random number generators running in my lab, and I asked a colleague to run a generator in Amsterdam and another in Princeton. We have 5 random number generators going. I figured it's kind of a worldwide effect. Maybe we would see a change in the generators as we approached that moment in time when the verdict was read. So we ran the generators, afterwards evaluated the results, and sure enough, we saw a spike with odds of 1,000 to 1 actually 2 places. One was when the camera switched from outside the courthouse to inside the chambers. There was like a huge rise of attention, which was reflected in the random generators. And then at the moment that the verdict was read, there was this large spike of coherence in all 5 generators at once. So this was taking an idea that we had seen in the laboratory and scaling it up to the world at large, and it appeared to work.
This leads naturally to wonder, are people affecting the world of reality that they see? You betcha they are. Every single one of us affects the reality that we see, even if we try to hide from that and play victim. We all are doing it.
Just tell me where you are. Okay, good. But hurry, will you please? Because these models are giving me a headache.